Okay, wonderful. Right before the call, we were just mentioning, Rahi was just mentioning how international even our panelists are. And you'll hear a little bit more about where Suzanne and Rahi are from, but just wanted to say welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us, making space in your time, in your schedules to be with us today. It's a very exciting conversation that we're going to have, and it holds a special place in my heart because I've received so much healing in this realm as well. And so just wanted to acknowledge the land that we are all on. I'm currently joining you from Costa Rica, and just wanted to also acknowledge the land of Canada and the First Nations communities, our allies who have been holding the energy there, and the work with the plant medicines and the earth stewardship in such a deep way. And as many of you know, the Psychedelic Association of Canada is mostly a volunteer-run organization. We are so grateful for your support in donations and membership and being with us as we hold this greater container for healing in not only in Canada, but globally as well. So why do we exist at the Psychedelic Association of Canada? We exist to awaken a revolution of well-being. Our vision is people living in harmony with each other and nature. Our mission is to educate about and advocate for access to all psychedelics as a basic human right. And our values are love, courage, communication, integrity, impact, and sustainability. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton over to Suzanne first and then to Rahi to share a little bit more with us around, you've read their bios hopefully, but just share a little bit more about their inception story of how they got connected to this work, why this work is really important for them, and currently what inspires them the most about this field. And I'll pass it over to Suzanne. Thank you so much for being with us, Suzanne. I know it's also because of the time difference. Just share with us where you're calling in from. We really appreciate that you set the time.
Well, as you already know, my name is Susan, and I'm Danish. So I am joining in from Denmark, from the very northern top of Denmark. So right below Norway, pretty much, with a tiny bit of ocean between us. And I'm currently in a place of winter and darkness with only 6.5 hour daylight here. So we treasure the daylight when it's there. And well, my journey into plant medicine and to this whole realm was sort of indirect, meaning that I was going down a path of personal development, mainly focusing on Tantra, but also spirituality and more shamanism and the shamanistic way, but without the medicine plant, more about, you know, the rhythms, the drums, the elements and breathing and stuff like that. And through that, I sort of accidentally stepped over ayahuasca by a very dear friend of me and my, at that time, husband, who was using ayahuasca, and she was gonna join a 5-day event where they were gonna drink with Mama Aya every day. And she said, I'm sure the facilitator will let you in. And we're like, it's last minute, she won't. So we contacted her and she said, well, you can join in, but only for 1 day. And for me, that was perfect because I had to go home. So I had my first experience not even that long ago. It was back in 2000, either 12 or 13, I'm not sure when. And for me, the very first meeting was extremely profound, which means that my very first journey, I was deep in for 24 hours without even coming out. And after that, it took me another 5 days to really come out. But I had the, I would say, honor to actually have Mama Aya present herself to me, because I, like many others, joined with my own intention. And then she showed up and she said, your own intention is not important. We need to talk about the work you do in the world. Will you learn? And I said, yes. And then a lot of stuff opened. So actually, ayahuasca has been a very important teacher plant for me. And I didn't get to look at myself until my 11th journey. The first 10 times I went in with my own intentions. every time. You're not important, your work. And that also means that ayahuasca has had a very deep impact on the way I work. I used to work much more cognitively, where she said, no, you have to go through the body. I have to way more body. And I was already doing, let's say, alternative style of body work, since I also work hands-on on genitals with a method typically known as de-armouring, at least in Europe. And I have a style called soft touch, which means everything I do is with the lightest touch. And during this first 10 voyages, the way I was already working on bodies, she literally turned everything upside down and said, no, you need to work like this. You need to alternate the direction you do things in. You need to start there, not there. And I'm quite a stubborn person. So in the beginning, I didn't want to listen, because all my many educations taught me it was different. Long traditions told me it was different. And when I finally gave in, because she kept being very insistent in voyages, and some of you might know that ayahuasca can be very painful when you're resisting on a physical level. So in the end, I was like, okay, I'm going to try. I'm going to give it a chance. And I did what she told me, and lo and behold, it works 10 times better than anything I'd ever done. So since then, my work really changed into what it is today. And that also means that after my first initial experiences coming into this work for my own purpose, but everything being about my work, I was also quite fast starting facilitating with my ex-husband, who trains in Peru. And I started joining or adding the body work to the medicine work as well, also around it, but also working with very different ways during the ceremonies. And that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years. And for me, it's to combine body-oriented healing work, but also self-developmental work with the wisdom of plant medicines. And it could be magic mushrooms, it could be ayahuasca, it can be different things. Personally, I prefer natural medicine. So I'm not so much into the artificial type of medicines. I feel that they are lacking the spirit, which is clearly in the medicine plants of the earth. And that's been something that I've been holding on to ever since, and I still do that occasionally. I do a lot of my own work focused on the body healing through only body work, but I also have several times a year where I co-create events where we bring the medicine together with the body work. And I find that it can bring the best of the two worlds together, I would say.
Beautiful share. Thank you so much, Susan, for giving us that introduction. And it does not surprise me that your first 10 ceremonies, that have been so focused on your service. And you and Rahi are two of the individuals that I really see in that commitment, in that deep devotion to, both of you are your schedules are full, and you always show up in all of you for your clients. And so it's I didn't know that part about your journey, and so it's amazing to hear, and a great intro into hearing that you already were doing the body work and the somatic work, and then with the connection with Aya, it just deepened in a whole different way. And definitely we'll have more questions as we go through. Passing it over to Rahi. How about for you?
Sure. Thanks for the invitation for this forum. And I just want to say that the association has done such great work, and I'm really honored to be a part of this event. Love hearing your journey, Suzanne. My journey, it was actually during an Aya ceremony that I got the confirmation to move into this work professionally as a somatic sex educator and sexological body worker, because it was such a clear vision. This happened in Peru back in 2015. Before that, so my journey actually started in the womb. I was positioned in my mother's womb in a way where when I came out of her womb, my legs were crooked instead of being straight. And so rather than receiving surgery on my knees, my mom lotioned and massaged my legs every night until eventually they grew out straight, which took about 3 years. Now, during this time that she was massaging me every day, she also lost my younger brother, who survived for 2 or 3 days. And she had this frozen pain in her womb as a result. He was malnourished. He came late. He was 10 months when he was born, and he wasn't pushing. So the doctors had to manually kind of force the birth. This was in the late 60s. And she said it was the most painful of the 3 births, and that's including my sister, who was a breech baby. And so, you know, I believe that it's a combination of touch being my first language, understanding and benefiting from the healing properties of touch, that drew me to doing this work. But at the same time, knowing what I do now, I believe that as an infant, I sensed my mother's pain as she was massaging me every day after this traumatic birth experience. And, you know, when she told me this story, it made me feel like resolving frozen pain in the body is what my purpose is now. And I think it had to have been informed in some way from those early experiences. So my background is I have a master's in psychology with a particular fascination and focus on developmental psychology, and specifically how our initial touch and developmental imprints impact and influence our adult sexual behaviors, patterns, and desires. And so eventually I became after the Aya ceremony, I became a certified sexological body worker, somatic sex educator for legal purposes, to do this work professionally in California, although I had been doing this work years before. And the body of work that I offer now is a combination of these influences, a combination of developmental psychology, restoring boundary and consent ruptures, and addressing genital armor that shows up in the pelvis, but really anywhere in the body, as an unconscious chronic guarding within the tissues and fascia, which by and large are holding some unintegrated emotional material, traumatic event, life force that needs the safe space to really be discharged and expressed and really met and honored. So as I shared in 2015, I was in Peru and I had this powerful experience with Mother Ayahuasca, and the medicine showed me that this is my purpose, that this is what I'm here to do. And so when I came back, I just followed that, and my explorations of introducing plant medicines is relatively recent. I have kind of a mastermind in the Vancouver, Canada area, actually, of other certified sexological body workers who are experienced in psychedelic medicines. And we gather once a year to kind of create a lab amongst ourselves and work on each other's bodies whilst we try different plant medicines. And what I found, for example, just earlier this year, is when the receiver and I take the same strain of psilocybin, I find that my senses are attuning to their body in a way where I believe the mycelium in each of our bodies are communicating with each other. It's almost like their tendons are speaking to my touch. The only 2 medicines that I've introduced into sessions have been based on clients' requests, and they've been psilocybin and MDMA. And I have found both to be, psilocybin, I don't take anything. My client takes psilocybin, a low dose, and they find that the mental chatter is just either off or very low, so that there's an enhanced inhabitation of their embodied sensations. With MDMA, it was with a client who had realized that the perpetrator of his sexual abuse was his mother, and had a lot of anger and grief around that. And it was the MDMA that assisted his access to that emotional material that was able to release during the session. So I'm very fascinated and want to experiment and learn more about how these 2 sacred disciplines can really align and support each other, because I feel like they're really, I feel like sexual energy in its kind of purest form is just life force energy. And I feel like the plant medicines and sexual energy are both really there to help us release and really embody our purest form.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing, Rahi. Again, both of you bring such wealth of wisdom, and we can just like pull one or two of these threads and really talk about it in full, I'm sure for hours. But today we just want to give you guys a chance to get a bit of an idea of what's possible in this work and what kind of healing is happening. And before I introduce myself, I just want to give a really deep thank you to our wonderful, one of the two paid individuals at the Psychedelic Association of Canada, Cheryl. She is our lady who wears many hats, but also as our main events coordinator. She is with us behind the scenes today. So just wanted to say thank you, Cheryl, for all that you do for the organization and also through your own modalities of healing. For some reason, if my internet cuts out as I'm joining, as I shared from Costa Rica, don't worry, Cheryl will jump in on the call and she'll continue the conversation, but I just wanted to let you guys know of that. As some of you may know me from previous webinars and events, I'm one of the founding members of the Psychedelic Association of Canada. And again, just like Suzanne and Rahi, a lot of this work, a lot of the inspiration for a lot of what we do, and maybe this resonates with you all, is through the plant medicines. And for me, it's been ayahuasca as well. She's been my main teacher. But of course, I have a lot of respect for cannabis as well. Santa Maria is the reverent name for that medicine, and want to just honor both of the medicines in the way that they work with the human body, and cannabis especially also as a form of, for me, a very deep tantric teacher and an embodied teacher. And so yeah, my journey started with ayahuasca in 2013, and soon after I was going through my own healing with sexual trauma that I didn't even have memories of. So I had, maybe some of you can relate, suppressed memories of sexual trauma at the age of 5, and it wasn't until age of 28 or so, first connecting with ayahuasca and then connecting with my mentor at that time, in the safety of those containers, I started having recollection of my own trauma. And now working so deeply with clients, it's across the board for me, that every single person who comes has had some sort of a violation of a boundary. And if it's not a violation of a boundary when they were smaller, maybe something that has happened later on in life, but usually it's when they were a child. And so my work actually in this realm, like I've been working with Aya deeply and supporting in ceremonies, both in and out of the ceremonies, and now facilitate my own as well. And so when I was in LA and living there and assisting in the ceremonies in Santa Cruz in LA, one of my dear sisters and friends on the path actually told me about Rahi's work. And right away I was like, okay, this is actually the next edge for me. I had never explored kind of like what Rahi was saying, those frozen parts within the body. I had done a lot of work with Aya and I'm going to get quite open and vulnerable with all of you, because I think it's important for us to have these honest conversations. But there were moments where literally the medicine was cleansing out my uterus or rewiring certain parts of my sexual chemistry and my sexual physiological makeup. And so I had done that work with Aya, and it freed me so much in the lower chakras, but I was still kind of in the upper chakras. I hadn't actually fully landed. And so when I heard about Rahi's work, it was one of those moments where it was like a yes. And he so kindly opened up the time for us. And my first experience of that time with Rahi was nothing short than a ceremony. It was around maybe 7 or 8 hours long. And it was so potent in the way that I was so connected to, and of course, Rahi's a master of his of his work. And there's so much safety. I never felt that I would be able to do that work because, of course, as having someone who has had violation, I was guarded in many ways. And so it was an honor to be able to work with Rahi and be able to sense that level of safety to actually open up and to be able to do the work internally within my system. And I was a different person. Many people commented on my energy and my aura afterwards, and they kept asking me, what have you done? You feel different, you look different. And so I'm going to pass it actually over to Suzanne in regards to the actual work. I know both of you work a little bit differently, but I want to ask you, Suzanne, maybe give us, whether it's a case study of someone so we can kind of see how you would work specifically with one person, or an overall idea of maybe from beginning kind of throughout the process.
So personally, I don't do anymore. I don't do one-on-one work while people are in a journey of anything. I do it in the group setting where it's several days container and where there are multiple people in a group. So typically those containers would be like 4 days long, and there would be a couple of days where there's a lot of body work done. First, there would be the work done to just get used to each other in a group, because these groups are typically containing of people that don't know each other. And in the group, sometimes people will come with their partner, and then they will be working with their partner during this workshop retreat, and others come just by themselves, knowing that they will be pairing up. Because what I do is that I teach people how to work with each other. So I very much teach in these groups one participant how to work with another participant, and then they will form a couple that will then swap over and reverse who's the giver and who's the doer, or the receiver. And when we then go into the body work at that point, or into the ceremony at that point, it's typically on day 3 out of the 4 that we will go into the ceremonial work. We will be using shamanic methods before. So that means in the 2 days where we are, let's say, preparing for the ceremony, we use a lot of medicinal steam bath. And sometimes these medicinal steam bath holds toei, which is also a psychedelic in it, and at the same time, the medicine plants that we put into it really depends on the group. So the steam bath is always dependent on who is in our group, what type of healing do we need in there, and that will then become the concoction of all the different herbs and medicines that are in the steams that we're using. And that will typically be what they then will do every night. They will be having, before they go to bed, this medicinal steam bath, and then leaving that steam to dry in on the skin before they then go to bed, allowing the medicine, which is now dried in all over their skin, to come all the way into the system. So that's part of the preparation. And on the day where we have the ceremony, I'll always at that time have had a conversation and permission giving from anyone who is in the event to whether or not I'm allowed to do body work while they're in the middle of their journey. And to do that work, it's very important that I'm connected as well, because there are journeys where I should never, ever interfere, because that would be robbing somebody of their own important journey if it's very essential that they do all the steps themselves. And luckily, when you're in these ceremonies, my experience is that the plant medicine gives me very, very clear messages. Yes, you can work here. No, you can't work here. You can do this much here, but don't do that. And I will always be tuning in and asking for permission before I do anything with people. During the ceremony, I will not be asking the individual permission. I did that up front. meaning that upfront I know whether or not I'm allowed to come. Some will call me during the voyage in a journey and call me and say, could you work on me now? Others have just given me the permission. So I'm asking the plant medicine permission before I move in. So I would go sit next to someone, ask permission, check in, am I getting a yes or a no to actually do work? And then I will be guided to where to touch. I will never be doing the sexual genital work in a ceremony, because that would be, normally with touch directly on the genitals. I might still on the outside have a hand or a finger through the clothing on a point that I need to go to. And my experience when this is done in the ceremony is that when people have type of blocks like you're describing because of frozen energy from experiences that were, either unwanted or experiences that were done to them, or experiences that at the moment when they had it earlier in life was too overwhelming, and therefore the body simply just had to store it because it was too much to handle. But it wasn't necessarily anything done to them from a, let's say, an outer force that could have been different. It could have been, of course, sometimes natural catastrophe, accident, stuff like that as well. But it's typically these two type of frozen energy I will discover, that it's an energy where you have what you could call a perpetrator, or it's energy where the situation on its own was too overwhelming. And when these energies then are in the medicine plant, typically there's always an easier access for people, because the normal day consciousness of barriers and defense systems and what's the word in English, programs that normally keeps them from not entering, they're sort of out of the way at that time, so it's more open. And that means when I would be touching, sometimes in the ceremony, I might actually, when I touch, ask them, just breathe into this place. So we do a little bit of co-creation. If they're not too deep in, with others, they're so deep in, I just let the work do its own, but I don't interfere in a dialogue with them because they're already in their own space. And I do my best to also really have a sense of where are they at right now, what's actually going on inside of them. The experience from this work is typically that you will see either that there will be a clearance of the energy where suddenly softness comes in, relaxation comes in, but not rarely will you also see massive purging at this moment when it starts releasing, that they will purge. And some will purge this way, some will purge actually by needing to go to the toilet. Others will more purge with a lot of emotions coming out. Can be crying, it can be that there's yelling that needs to come out. Maybe they start suddenly saying words of boundaries. That's not rare, that all these boundaries they couldn't express, they might be coming out at this time here. And when those ceremonies are over and people are moving forward in life, it's not rare that I actually hear from people long time after, where they write me or sometimes even send me an email saying, hey, I just want to send you this email because today's the 1 year day or the 5 year day of total transformation, where I let go of this experience I had, and suddenly I experienced my sexuality opening up. I experienced my life force energy, because that is what it is about. Just like Rahi said, it's all about life force energy, but where clearing this frozen area allows them to suddenly have life force energy available also for manifesting dreams they've had, boundaries that they didn't even know they were setting up for themselves, like limitations. They're just out of the way, and suddenly they start walking a new path, or they go out and they build that career or company or whatever they had been thinking about but never dared. So it's also like there is I don't know, I always get this image like somebody had hooks in them and they were trying to come forward in life, but something always kept them back. And these hooks, they sort of let go, and suddenly they can move in space. And I mean, some of the things I also experienced, don't know if this is the right setting to say it, but I'm still going to do it. Hope you're not going to get lashed back. But one of the things I've experienced a lot of times is when we have had homosexual people in the voyages that have wanted to work with their sexuality as a general, is that they actually come afterwards and they tell me, hey, I just want you to know I'm not homosexual anymore. I'm just sexual. Where they suddenly realized that a big part of their preference for one gender was actually attached to fear of that gender they're not relating to. And when that fear suddenly is gone, they see themselves walking outside and suddenly they look at a gender they've never ever, even glanced at, and then like, oh, that's an interesting person. And yeah, so I've seen that many, many times where they're like, it's like, I didn't know that apparently I was blocking myself. So they suddenly experience that now they're just open to people. No more that people with one appearance. It's just people with the right heart. So I've experienced many, many times actually. And especially in co-creation with medicine plants when they really release. And my feeling is it's because a very, very deep fear has been removed that has then probably had an impact on how they dared live their sexuality. And when that was removed, then suddenly they were just open to be sexual, whatever that means. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'll share a little bit and then I'll pass it over to you, Rahi, again. Thank you everyone for all the questions that are coming in. We are making note of it. And I think we're going to continue the conversation because there's still so much here. And then towards maybe the hour, we'll get into some of them, but I appreciate everyone sharing here. As far as what I'm hearing you say is, of course, consent prior with the work, even before opening up. Every group requires its own needs and energy. And so the way that you bring even the plants for the steams is attuned to the group's energy, which is beautiful. The partner work, whether people are in couples or if they're coming individually, they partner up. And there's a lot of support in being able to open up and do that with another human being. The vulnerability and the safety, again, is incredible that you create another, sex therapy facilitators do that. And I also want to honor just the attunement. Both of you talked about that attunement to your client and what really the medicine is saying, and to follow that and to really trust that. And I also just want to make sure that, friends who are watching this understand that, Suzanne, if I'm understanding correctly too, that you don't make contact with the genitals directly in your work with medicine. It's over clothes, it's on the space, but it's never in the way that you would work with them outside of medicine. This, I think, is a very important point to make.
Yeah. It would max be a hand on the vulva. Sometimes it could be a finger that is touching, on the pubic bone, but I'm not, let's say, fondling or in that way going into points, because that together with the plant medicine is too much. But it can still benefit that finger because it allows the energy to sort of move to that area and work more specifically there, compared to if I didn't have, let's say, it's almost like putting a hand on and then just sort of through a very soft touch, guiding the energy to see if there's something to clear from here. Yeah.
Beautiful. Very good. Yeah. And that's exactly around my work as well. When I, from the beginning, when I started working with individuals in groups, it's a different kind of thing than when you're working one-on-one or with couples. But with groups, I always was somatic in the way that I would, if I was guided by the medicine, a hand on the heart or a hand on their brains to support the neural pathways and the brain chemistry shifting. Or even, I'll never forget one of the ceremonies the medicine kind of supported in me holding the kind of the ovaries and the waist of a woman. And as I did that, she just, she was able to, as you're talking about, release and cry and also let out a scream. And later on, we realized that she actually had a miscarriage many years ago. And this, so it's not just sexual trauma, but it's any kind of trauma to the body that creates this frozen energy. And as both of you are talking about it, yes, I absolutely agree that life force energy, especially from our root, gets suppressed, and then that energy is not able to move through our body and through our our chakras to be able to really give us the openness that we can utilize for our work, for our relationships, for showing up as an embodied loving individual. And so it's just incredible, the work with the medicine that way. And a lot of it is also energetic. So I agree with you that there's, for me, there's pulling of energy with the support of the individual. I love that you're also saying that it's a co-creation with the individual, so they can feel empowered, that they're also letting go of things that don't serve them or blocked energy in their field.
There's just one thing I'd like to add, and that is my experience is that even though the energy is frozen in the genital region and inside the pelvis or in the external part of the pelvis, in the majority of the cases, it actually never links back to anything sexually. It most often linked back to something that happened in the first 5 years of your life, often not even sexually related, but this relating to, you weren't the most popular kid amongst your siblings, or, you didn't feel prioritized, or your parents were too busy, so therefore you felt unloved. So very often it's very little, inner children that are wounded sitting in that area. And then they are influencing how that sexual energy then can flow or not flow when we become adult. And then it has an interference into our sexual capacity or experience, but not because the root actually had anything to do with sexuality. It's just where it lands when we're that young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Exactly. And so, Rahi, with you, I'd love to also get a picture for the individuals of how you work, and maybe give us an example with a client. And I also would love to hear you share a little bit more about the lab, kind of as you talked about in Vancouver area, and the way that you're working with fellow practitioners with the different medicines.
Sure. I do want to piggyback, excuse me, on the importance and the attunement to how the life force wants to unfold. The way Suzanne described how she's attuning to and listening for Mother Aya's guidance. In a similar way, in sessions, we're really listening for how the life force in the client wants to emerge. And that's kind of the compass for how we facilitate in de-armoring work. And I think that needs to be said, because there are certain de-armoring approaches where it is a practitioner that kind of, imposes their ideas rather than listening and attuning for what wants to emerge from the client. I can share an example that will, I think, illustrate the different ways this frozen pain or frozen energy, frozen life force can de-armor. So I had a client come in 8 months postpartum. She had a traumatic birth experience 8 months prior, where she had planned for a conscious birth with her husband and a midwife. But because she was 47 at the time, there were some complications. She was rushed to the hospital, and the doctors at the medical facility essentially took over, right? And so the first images of she with her newborn were that her newborn had metal tubes being forced down the infant's throat to withdraw liquid that was being that had accumulated in the lungs and then whisked away. So when she came 8 months after this birth experience, she looked like she was 8 months pregnant because she was numb from the waist down. She had not dealt emotionally with all of what had happened because now she had a newborn and all the attention went to the newborn. So the first thing we did, like Suzanne mentioned, the steaming. The first thing we did was have her sit on a steam sauna. And as soon as the gentle, warm steam met her vulva, she felt that part of her body and just tears, because all of those emotions, the grief, the sadness, were able to be felt and metabolized. As we were, I rarely do pelvic work in a first session, but eventually when we got to the pelvic work, again, it's a lot of frozen emotion, unintegrated emotion. And as you can imagine, it was a lot of anger, rage towards the medical establishment, towards the male doctors who they took over her body, really. And after, I should mention, one of the painful things for her and her birth experience was not only that it was traumatic, but her baby Ava would get really colicky and impatient in her arms, but she wasn't that way in the father's arms. So she texted me after the first pelvic session and she said, Rahi, last night was the first night Ava slept through the night without waking up. So it could be a coincidence. I think there's a correlation between she releasing all of this anger, all of this sadness and fear regarding the birth of her baby, and her baby feeling like it could sleep through the night. Around the third session, when we got to de-armoring the genitalia, and I should say I'm also a student of Suzanne, so her soft approach, all of my work has been informed by the transmission that has come through Suzanne as well, and using the soft de-armoring approach, there was one area that was stubborn. And when I asked her, is there a memory or image that's coming to you? She had said, I didn't want them to take my baby away from me. And I had assumed that this was the event 8 months previous. In her final session, we got to that area. And again, I asked her, is there an image or memory that's coming to you? And she had a blocked out memory of having an abortion when she was 24 years old. Suddenly it came to her. Now, this is a woman who was raised Catholic. She had no support around her, and she judged herself as a baby killer. This image came to her, and she was able to grieve and let go and forgive herself for doing what she felt like was the only choice for herself. When she texted me a few days later, Ava is no longer colicky or impatient in her arms. So, I have to imagine, is it because she was judging herself unconsciously as a baby killer, and maybe the 8-month-old Ava was picking up on this? Maybe she was feeling like she was a baby killer and felt guilty about it, holding her own baby. I don't know. I don't particularly care. All I know is that it's gone, that whatever frozen material was there has been released. And now the life force, right? The life force can flow as it is organically designed to. So here's an example of frozen material. First, steaming can be a really effective way of de-armoring without human touch if the client's body isn't ready to receive human touch. It increases blood flow, it relaxes the pelvic floor muscles. In her situation, it got her in touch with those emotions that were frozen there. And then there are layers, through each session until we finally got to that deeper layer. And now, hearing how Suzanne facilitates her shamanic sexual de-armoring retreats, it makes me wonder with certain clients, if they had the opportunity to do an ayahuasca ceremony after that, what else, what else would the mother plant reveal that the client is ready to address or metabolize?
Beautiful, beautiful. And before you share a little bit about the lab, yes, Suzanne, please.
Oh, I would just love to piggyback a little on your experience with the woman, if I may add some things. because that is one of the things I experience a lot, what I call rebirthing in whatever form. And I see it a lot where it can be miscarriages, abortions that have never been completed in a full cycle of also honoring that child that was there, even if it never became more than what it became before the end of either abortion or miscarriage, but also various births that have, let's say, gone wrong compared to desires, wishes, and expectations of the parents, or where there's been trauma, there's been, you know, complications, there's been often also, maybe because of pathological complications, there's been, you know, the professionals taking over. And here, maybe I should tell the viewers and listeners, I've been a midwife for 23 years. So I know this world from both from the inside as well, of how sometimes you just take over because at that moment it's life and death for the baby. But it does have a very big energetic impact, because when you have this baby coming into you and it starts growing, my sense of it is that our body already has a blueprint of how this whole circle of you know, developing a new human being and how you birth this being into the world, how that should look, and almost like stages and phases that this little baby needs to go through. And when these complications come on and we just grab in and we take over, we basically, you know, we scatter or we put a block into that natural flow. And it's not uncommon that after complicated births or even miscarriages, abortions, that, but especially birth, that child doesn't have a good connection with the mother compared to the connection it has with the father. And that can be not just babies, that can be all the way up to their teenagers, you know, and they would never ever come home and say, hey mom, how have your day been, just slamming doors. And when you're then in this type of de-armoring work, healing work, then go through the process of all the emotions, and the body can literally go into physically rebirthing, where the woman suddenly is like, I've got contractions every 3 minutes and I feel I need to push. And then I basically do a birth with them. But these women feel physically like there is a child coming out of them. And what always happens after these experiences, and I literally mean always, is that they come back and they say, my child just want to hang out now. And if it's teenagers, they're like, I'm shocked. I came home and, you know, this kid has a 16-year-old boy have just been slamming doors in my face for 4 years and, you know, never wanting to anything. Leave me alone, mom. And then I come home and my boy comes home from school, or girl, and says, hey mom, how was your day? Should we have a cup of tea? And you're like, what? And where they experience that whole connection changes. And what I'm hearing is that it can have the exact same impact as family constellation work, where it simply just seems like it untangles something that energetically affected the direct connection between the child and the mother. But very often, actually, within the entire family structure, it has ripple effects. It's super powerful. So it's beautiful to hear you had such an experience, but it's not a one-off experience. It's really what this work can do.
Beautiful. Yes, I remember both of you actually sharing that sometimes when, as you're saying, Suzanne, there's a block or a wedge placed in the natural cycle of our life cycle, a healthy life cycle, or a healthy birth cycle. And when there's been an interruption of that or wedge placed in, that individuals can actually go back to that time and give themselves the full birthing experience. Especially, Rafi, you were talking once about a C-section and how that, like, the woman is actually still in this process of, or the body is still in this process of wanting to allow the energy of the baby to come through. And so it's just incredible work. And I love that we're talking about it because, you know, for me, I feel like right now, the next phase of our work is really sexuality and frequency and these subtle, you know, subtle shifts in the body. And And so it's really beautiful to hear both of you in that way. And I just work with a mother and daughter, intergenerational. We're talking about intergenerational shifts. So I just worked with a mother and daughter this weekend, and exactly because of her pain with her own mother and what had happened, there was a disconnect between her and her 3 daughters. And even though they tried, it just still was edgy and still was not conducive. And so while the mother took care of her own body and released the trauma of anger and violence from her own mother and forgave, and then did the inner child work within ceremony, which I think is a really important other piece of it. When she took that, then her and her daughter could both just relax. There's a sense of relaxation, and you're talking about it, and then the rest of the family can also relax, because that energy is not just in the field. And children are so sensitive, they feel everything, so they're amazing thermometers of how the parent is doing. So I just really appreciate this discussion. And also for men, right, we've talked a lot about women, but also I want to shift gears, because Rahi, you also, and Susan, you both also work very deeply with men. And so Rahi, please feel free to either go in the direction of working with men and what that looks like, or with the lab and what's happening in your field with professionals, especially men.
Sure. There's so many threads here that I want to kind of like ride on, because I witnessed Suzanne facilitate that completion of energy from a mother who had a C-section, and the cervix was not feeling complete. And it was like, and she did give birth, and it was, I remember, I think it was Suzanne's hands that came out and rested on the woman's belly as if it was an infant, to complete that process. So I'm quite fascinated with the cervix. I mean, all of it, but particularly with possibilities of cervical de-armoring. As far as our lab, it is we've done it. This year will be our 3rd year, and it's a small group of about 7 or 8 sexologists who work with the body somatically and are also experienced with psychedelics. And so, every day there's kind of a different intention and a focus, and there are, different quantities of psilocybin. It's not MDMA, it's maybe it's 3-MA. It's a different version of MDMA. LSD. I think those are the 3. And people will consume however much they want based on what their exploration and intention is in wanting to learn what wisdom or what support the medicines can aid with the body work. And that's where I discovered this, when I mentioned earlier, taking the same strain of psilocybin and feeling like the mycelium were communicating with each other between the receiver and myself. It's a lab where we co-create however we want to co-create with whatever medicines amongst these are available. Now, and it's a safe container because we're all experienced and very consent and trauma informed. When it comes to working with men, I want to say from the outset, the statistics are that 1 in 6 men have experienced some level of sexual abuse, at least in America, and it's just not reported. And a lot of times I'll be in a conversation with a male potential client or a client, and they won't realize that what they experienced was actually an abuse or a violation of their boundaries, because they didn't realize what boundaries were. And they just thought, oh, I'm 14. She was, my teacher or my mom's friend. I got lucky, not realizing that it actually went against what their body was ready for or wanted at the time. So, I have found in my own experience in de-armoring my own body and with male clients that a lot of the armor tends to focus around the anal sphincter, and much like G-spot massage can relieve and release a lot of frozen traumatic emotional material in female bodies, that the prostate massage can do the same in male bodies. So with men who come with a certain level of trauma or certain experiences that they feel like are stored in the prostate or in the anal sphincter, that can be a focus. And then men have a lot of pressures with performance and being erect and premature ejaculation and these other issues. And so there can be a lot of grief, rage at their own genitalia that shows up as constrictions and tension and frozen energy in their pelvis, in and around their penis and genitalia as well. Most male clients who come to me tend to be gay. And so, I think because of the homophobia in our culture, like a lot of heterosexual men don't feel comfortable coming to another heterosexual guy. So I tend to work with a lot of my male clients tend to be gay. And with that community, there's a lot of shame and repressed, just so much repression, and oftentimes abuse of that, from older lovers or older, older people that they had sex with. And so there's a lot of unpacking around the shame, around body image. I have found body image to be a big thing as well amongst my gay male clients. And so, again, it's frozen energy that we are listening for how it wants to emerge and bringing unconditional loving support to those areas so that it can unravel.
Well, thank you. And Suzanne, I'll pass it over to you in regards to how you work with men as well.
Well, my sessions one-on-one doesn't differ much in my experience from whether I work with a woman or a man, except from the fact that there are some anatomical differences. But of course there are also differences of what are the typical things that they've experienced. And I work a lot with the hetero men, more than the gay. I also have gay men, but I would say I probably have 90% hetero men before, and then the last 10% would be gay. And many of them are actually men that have never ever gone to any spiritual world, anything. They're like almost right off the street, like Mr. and Mrs. Canada type of people or Denmark type of people, but they've just heard about this work somehow, that it can help them move forward. And some of them literally don't even know when they come to me the first time what I do. And then when I start telling about, well, there is touch implied, then they're like, oh. But one of the things that I experience is that a lot of the ones that come to me have had sexual abuse when they were younger. And more often, the perpetrator was not an adult. It's quite common that the perpetrator was a teenager, and they were like 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. And it was someone between the age of 12 and 16 that were actually a perpetrator and sodomizing them, for instance. And some of them are therefore thinking it wasn't sexual abuse because it wasn't an adult. Because they have this idea, sexual abuse, then it was an adult, and it wasn't an adult, it was just a 12-year-old, I was 7. But when we then start looking into those, and some of them think in the beginning, oh, I just had sexual explorations. But then when we start looking at it, then they realize, no, actually, I didn't want it. But, the other one told me that's normal and you do want it. And then I went along with it. So in their mind, they've turned it into, no, I was part of it. And when we start unpacking it, no, they were not part of it at all. They were, seduced basically into it, but from another child that was just older, but still not someone who was an adult. And then, of course, also a fair percentage of them, it was an adult. And those adults were most of the time either family members or trusted community members. You know, it could be the guitar teacher, it could be the sports coach, it could be someone that would naturally, you know, the scouts leader, it could be someone that they would also have other relationships with, you know, in terms of doing something, and then this would go on as the hidden shameful thing on the side. And for the men, it's very much again this frozen energy, and I completely agree with Rahi that it's much more connected in the male body around the anal sphincter, around the prostate. There can also be penile work, especially around the shaft, that's needed to do where there's still also shame or pain spots. But these can be pain spots where they don't think about them really as pain, except they know that when they are sexual, maybe having intercourse or masturbating, that right before coming, there's this little sharp pain that comes from a short moment, sort of in the middle of the shaft. And that is actually an armor, and it's quite a typical armor with a very specific placement. So again, here it's through the touch, it's through the awareness, it's through just sinking into the tissue and figuring out what is it that the tissue wants or needs to go through. And that can be emotions, that can be an image, it can be memories, and it can be movements. The body just needs to do a movement that makes no sense in that moment where it comes up, but it did make sense if they had been able to do that movement back when they had their experience. So it's often unfinished defense movements that the body is holding on to this memory. I need to do this to push the other one away, or the leg starts to want to run because I want to run away, or I want to cover myself to, you know, protect my body. So there can be many movements the body wants to do, which is that memory. And that memory, when it's in the body, has been taking off life force energy, because it's a frozen memory where the body is basically still in that position. So that frees up a lot of energy when they can start, you know, utilizing that energy elsewhere in their life. But it's also, again, with the men, a lot of the work ends up being, like, I think, Rahi, you mentioned also this pressure. And especially because I work a lot with the heterosexual men, there's this pressure of, I have to be a good lover. And, you know, it's my duty that the woman is enjoying herself. And it's my fault if my erection is not strong enough or doesn't last long enough, or if I come too early. But I have just as many men that can't come, where that's a problem for them, because the woman now thinks I'm not into her because I don't, you know, ejaculate. So don't you really like it? So what I often experience here is that their sexual issues can often relate a lot to them constantly being out of their own body. They're so into the need of the other one that they're actually not present in their own body. And therefore, of course, it's difficult to really experience. And this is one of the topics where I experienced that when I've had these men in medicine plants. This is one of the things that when the plant medicine chooses to let them work on that during the ceremony, that they actually experience to get some breakthroughs to suddenly realize, oh, you know, when I'm sexual with someone else, this is a dance between two people. I'm not supposed to be 100% over in you, because when I'm that much in you, I'm not in myself anymore. And when I'm not in myself anymore, my body can't function, because sexuality, when it's at its best, is when two people are fully present in their own body in the now moment and then share it, not when I'm in you and you're in me. So there I experience often that the plant medicine has had an impact on specifically these things that has a lot to do with not being home in myself. It's a huge topic. One could go on forever, but I work pretty much 50-50 with female male bodies. So Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you both for sharing so deeply around that process with men and, sexuality across the spectrum, because this is, again, it's a time that I really feel that each one of us is coming into authentic expression, into complete wholeness of being, and having connection to every single part of our beingness, and sexual energy being that creation force within our lives. So I know we're at the hour mark, and I want to open it up to questions. Thank you everyone for being very patient. But before we do that, I also just want to say that we have, this is, if you're listening to this conversation and you're saying, wow, that reminds me of something in my life, or wow, I know a friend who went through this experience, and it's just peaked and it resonates with you. There's so much information and so much healing that can be done in this realm. And I'm going to pass it actually over to Rahi to share about a masterclass that's coming up this Saturday, and also a retreat that we're hosting in Costa Rica, which again I feel is very innovative, and it's the intersectionality of sexual therapy work as well as medicine work. So Rahi, if you could share a little bit about those two events.
Sure. So there is a free masterclass scheduled for this Saturday, December the 9th, from 10 to 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. It is a masterclass that myself and Suzanne and Salimeh and two other colleagues, Dr. Jennifer Lang, who's a holistic gynecologist and also a psychedelic integration specialist, and Kate Pearl, who's a body worker and also doing research in psychedelics. We're going to do it in Costa Rica. Oh, I'm sorry, the masterclass we're not doing in Costa Rica. The masterclass we're doing online this Saturday. And we're going to be exploring the theme of how sexual healing and ayahuasca can support each other. Some of the themes we're exploring today, but a little more streamlined to exactly that, ayahuasca and sexual healing. And the masterclass will be, we'll impart the experiences from all of us, from our different perspectives, because Dr. Lang has a perspective of how genital armor shows up as a gynecologist, in vaginismus and vulvodynia and all these different medical terms. Suzanne's been a psychotherapist specializing with sexual trauma, as well as a midwife. I'm a somatic sex educator. Salimeh has her brilliant work. So we're all approaching it from different points of view, and that's what we want to share this Saturday. And then in April, we actually have a retreat. It's a 7-day retreat that's going to take place in Costa Rica, that is going to facilitate 3 days of body de-armoring leading up to sexual de-armoring, followed by 1 day of an ayahuasca ceremony to invite the plant to impart its wisdom, into our cellular existence. And then there's going to be a very intentional integration period for a day and a half after that. So to find out more about the retreat, which takes place from April 14th to April 20th, why don't I'll type it into the chat here. There's a informational page that you can visit.
Right, I can do that as well if you want to. I can share both. Individuals have also asked about both of your contacts, so I'm going to share the link for the Costa Rica retreat, and I'm also going to share Rahi's podcast off of his website, because some individuals have asked to connect with both of you. I'm going to share Rahi's here. And Suzanne, if you also don't mind sharing your website in the chat here. And and for more information, you guys can also connect with Cheryl or myself, and happy to connect you on as well, or answer any other questions that you may have.
Great, thank you.
You're very welcome. And anything else, Rahi, before we switch to questions?
Nope. I'm just gonna also include the free masterclass link here. Okay.
I was thinking that maybe it's also relevant now that we are speaking about both masterclass and the retreat in Costa Rica, that we do have a super early bird for enrolling before the 15th this month. So if anyone are thinking, oh, that's something for me, then if you're quick, there is a very favorable price at this point.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Suzanne. Thank you for sharing your website as well. And Suzanne is right. You know, if this is resonating again deep in your heart and you're having that calling, even a conversation, you know, can be supportive. So please reach out. And I'm going to go back to some of the questions. Okay. And Rahi, someone is mentioning that they can't see. Yeah, you got it. Perfect. So the questions, let's start with, okay, interesting. It's a question about legality. So for all of us, how do we protect ourselves from individuals who choose to sue you legally for sexual abuse after you work with them? So I think this question is more alluding to how do we as practitioners protect and create trauma-informed care and consent with our clients.
Sure. So I'll address, so in the state of California, the state government actually approved the sexological bodywork curriculum that issues the certification as a state certified somatic sex educator. So, you know, after the ayahuasca journey that confirmed that this is not only my path, but encouraged me to pursue it, that's when I went and got this training in order to get that certification. You know, so I practice in the state of California, so I don't really worry about that. And the rest of the country, I think it's a very gray area in the US anyway, between making genital contact, even though it's for healing and therapeutic purposes, and an exchange of money. And so I think a lot of people practice kind of underground, you know, like amongst, you know, they have a site, but they don't advertise, you know, that kind of a thing, you know, and rely on word of mouth. But I have not, you know, I've spoken to lawyers about this in California, and they have said, you know, as long as it's clear that your work is for healing purposes, the authorities aren't going to waste your time with pursuing you. They're going to chase after the tantric masseuses that are working in kind of more gray areas. So it has not been a concern for me.
Yeah, it's not a concern for me either, because like Rahi says, it's first of all, my sessions do not include me sharing my sexual energy with any of my clients at all. I come from a place of love, nurturing. If anything, it's more parental type of energy of holding space. And also I'm in Europe. That makes a huge difference. Let's just put it that way as well. But from a legal perspective, I used to be authorized as a midwife, and I say used to because I actually turned in my authorization 2 years ago. And that was because the authorities did not like that I was connected with plant medicine. So they started making issues about my authorization. So I told them, well, I'm never going to come back to the hospital working as a midwife. So you can just get your authorization back. But while I was authorized as a midwife, I had, let's say, the legal blueprint or blue stamp or approval stamp to touch genitals, but only on women, not on men. And I've been doing this genital work for the last 15 years professionally. And for me, it's very much a question of what type of agreements do I have with my clients. I do not go underground. It's fully public what I do. And it's always done by agreement. What a lot will do in Europe is that they will make sure that they have written statements, written agreements where they already have written down either the procedure or the form it's going to be done at. But for sure, if you're a male practitioner also in Europe, then you have to be, I would say, even more clean in your work. And you have to make sure that your clients fully understand what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, how you're going to do it. And you need to master your own sexual energy so that you don't sit and spill out your own sexual energy. You need to know that you are not leaking sexually yourself. So it does require, when you want to work on sexuality and genitals with someone else, you really have to have done your own work yourself, because you need to be very clean in your own things, so you're not sitting there with your own stories polluting the work. And personally, in the work I train people in, big part of the training is also learning to deliberately turn on and off whether or not your sexual energy are being allowed to be transmitted. Because there can be times where it's a benefit that I actually share my sexual energy with a client, not as a loop for them to have an energetic sexual experience with me, where I would deliberately turn on my sexual energy, which, by the way, would always be pre-agreed before the session starts. There will never be anything that changes around genital work during a session if it has not been agreed upon before the session starts. Because once the session is rolling and people are maybe in their trauma responses, you have no idea if you're actually getting requests or answers back from someone who is at their full senses. So if some client will change their request in the middle of a session, I will never allow to, let's say, upgrade the type of genital touch or sexual work we agreed upon, because I don't know who's asking me. Then I would tell them that will have to be for a future session when we have pre-agreed up front what can happen in this session. But if I share my sexual energy, it's more to give a, let's say, flood them with an experience. That could be a woman who's never felt her womb come alive, never felt the flow of it, and she's heard all the things, but I don't know what others are speaking about. There I can actually share my sexual energy and have her have an experience of, wow, is this potential in my body? And as soon as she's had that experience, I'll block it again, because this was just to give her an imprint. And from there on, we'll start working on how can you learn to do this for yourself. So it's not about, you know, them coming back because they need me now to fill up that tank within themselves. But it can be very precious to allow some to have that embodied experience of the potential even within themselves. So they also know what am I striving for? What am I aiming to develop myself towards? But I would say in general, some countries in Europe, if you do this work and you want to do it legally, you actually legally have to go, if you take money for these type of sessions, you have to go and register yourself as being a prostitute. That's the official record in several countries in Europe, which means that nobody does it. Because they're not offering sexual work, they're offering sexual healing, and they're not offering an interaction on a tantric level. So that's what I can share with that.
Thank you both. Yes, I think as always, just bringing it back to our own personal responsibility as practitioners. Like, it's interesting that these questions are coming up, and I always just turn it back to my colleagues or to my to different individuals and say, why is this question coming up around legality for you? Okay, great. Yes, we need to have certain things in structure. It's wonderful that you have that also as like a community in California, Rahi. It's recognized in that way. In Denmark, in its own way. I know that I have, similar to what both of you are saying, very clear outlines of what's going to take place. And I don't go beyond those parameters when the work has started. And so there is a one-page agreement that outlines, and the individual signs that. And so we have at least that kind of framework. But at the same time, if you have experienced something where a client has said, you know, this was a breach, that is for us as practitioners to look at. And so if that's coming up in your field, like you were saying, Suzanne, where is the leakage within your own work? What do you need to do to clean up your own sexual energy? Because this work is so sensitive and so subtle that, again, we need to be, and both of you, this is years and years of you guys committing and dedicating yourselves to the cleansing work within yourselves to be able to be that safe harbor for individuals to be able to unwind, to be able to receive a transmission. And so absolutely, I feel like it's a massive responsibility for us to be able to, work with people in this kind of way. And so I hope that and whoever asked that question, please let me know if that did answer your question. And as always, you can reach out to us if you need further clarification. And Cheryl's saying that there will be a recording of this webinar on our website and the private members community after Christmas. And so I'm just going to go to one more question which is actually along the same, and maybe actually, Suzanne, you talked about this, is that a member asks, how do you get consent from all the parts of a person, even when they don't know all their parts, especially when there is a dissociated child victim part? And so you were saying that, yes, you'll never go beyond what has been agreed upon. Any further thoughts? Maybe Rahi, we can go to you, then Suzanne can add.
Sure. The way I structure my sessions is to repair ruptures sequentially, starting with the ruptures that occurred during the developmental years. So I use a modality called neuroaffective touch, which is designed to address developmental and relational trauma that happens during our young years, so that the needs of that young child, also finding the voice of that young child so that they can really assert their boundaries and repair ruptures from boundary ruptures in that way. Before addressing ruptures that happen in adolescence, and then we address the adult issues that are presenting themselves currently in the pelvic bowl. So that's one way of addressing it, is to really be intentional about seeking to repair those ruptures from the early years first, because there's always a thread. As Suzanne mentioned, so much of the trauma and the frozen energy is really from our infancy. And yeah, there's really, I feel like a key component of a session has to be around the client's capacity to attune to what their boundaries are, what their body wants, and give voice to it. And the more that a body starts to have the positive feedback that their voice matters, that attuning to their body results in their body getting only what it wants and exactly what it wants, the stronger that muscle gets, and the more the body starts to assert that for itself.
Beautiful. Anything that you'd like to add to that, Suzanne?
Yeah, that also in reflection, or to answer to the question, a lot of people I work with do come to me with lots of trauma. That's a very big key work is trauma. And that also means that before I even go into sessions, even just in the preliminary talk we have, I'm already watching how they're breathing. I'm watching how they're wording themselves, how they're talking, what is their body language, how they're positioning themselves towards me. If I make a little move in my body, how are they responding to those little moves of me? All of that is, even before I get to body work, telling me a lot of information about this client, and also about, how is their sense of self, their sense of boundaries, their sense of body as well. And if I have the slightest doubt, I would start any session with first working with the practice of hands-on, hands-off. A lot of people that have had their boundaries crossed have used a lot of time and spend a lot of time learning to put up boundaries. That is great. But one of the things I'm experiencing is that that's not good enough in a session, because what the body is afraid of is not stopping things. The body is afraid of what's going to come at me that I don't have control of. So I experience that the body actually needs to have an embodied sense also of I don't just have the capacity of deciding when things stops. I also have the capacity of deciding when it starts. So I might do a practice first where I really get their body to have an embodied experience of, I might be the one who's going to do the work on them, but they're the boss. Even if I'm the one doing, they are the boss of everything. And we don't start the body work until I know that they can both, you know, stop me, but also start me. Not just verbally, also physically, because exactly if you are dissociated, you might have lost access to your voice, but you might still have access to your movement, or the other way around. You don't have access to your movement, but you have access to your voice. And for me, very often this practice first of hands on, hands off, and it's done with them, you know, giving me the order, but it's also done with them taking my hand, take it off, take it on. And, you know, people are always so polite. And when they've been polite for a while, I'll tell them, okay, don't be so polite. Imagine that you didn't really want me to touch you, and I am. Then suddenly they'll take my hand and they'll throw it off me. And you will often see such a release in the nervous system of, oh my God, I've got the power to do this. So it's very empowering for them. During the session, even though I have a consent from voice and a consent from what I call day consciousness, the adult that come for the session, I am constantly looking out for when is the body not in, is it called congruence with the mind? When is the body showing me different signals than what they said to me? And when I notice, like, no, this body is not inviting, it's giving all these tiny little subtle clues. So a lot of my work is body reading on a very subtle level, from micro movements and so on. And every time I see, okay, there's something here, I'll constantly address, say, hey, try and feel into your body. Does it really feel like you want this? I would never go to genital work without have them really tune in. When we are through working with the body and we move on to the genital, without really tuning in, is there actually a yes? And if I sense that their head is saying yes, but the body is clearly not saying yes, then I'll start doing, you know, work with them to really start to feel internally, what is my body really saying? Because a lot of people don't know how to translate the language of the body into the actual meaning, because when we were young, that was overwritten so many times. You know, as a kid, I'm feeling this. No, sweetie, you're not. You're feeling that. And then you start doubting, and eventually you might not even be able to read it anymore. So I would never just move in, and constantly in the work, I'm always tuning in. Yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Absolutely. And we're getting a lot into the details now of the work, and again, the subtle layers of it. And so I know there's a lot of questions in this regard. And like, for example, someone asked if what happens with the shaking or the involuntary movements within that space, or how are patients being assessed for possible fragmentation if they're coming in. And I personally don't work so much with the labels. I feel like we're on a spectrum of trauma. So if you're assessing someone for bipolar or schizophrenia, I put them onto the spectrum of trauma, but there's a lot of questions around the details of this work. And so we as panelists, we will discuss them and maybe release a video afterwards, or you guys can also join us for the masterclass or connect with Rahi and Susan, myself individually for these kinds of questions. But again, everything is done from a trauma-informed lens, just like how we would work with any other client. And it's very much about the empowerment model that individuals can ask for what it is that they need, and to give that authority to individuals. And so we're going to end here. I know there's a lot more to share. Thank you so much, Susan, for sharing your wisdom and your love. And like you said, your care for your clients. Rahi, you as well, in the sense that you just show up day after day, and also expanding both of your own knowledge base and continuing to learn and to share. So thank you, Cheryl, for your help as well in putting on this amazing event. Thank you, everyone, for showing up and being here and doing the great work. And I hope that we get to continue to build these relationships and with the support of the plants. Thank you to all the plant medicines for holding us during this time. with these incredible gifts of healing. All right, we'll close it here. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us.